You know, it took me quite a long time to truly realize this. Joy doesn't come from within ourselves. Sometimes the greatest happiness actually appears when we can smile at the happiness of others. It sounds simple, right? But think about it. How often do we exhaust ourselves by constantly comparing, by asking, why do they have it, why I don't? I used to live like that, and honestly, it drained me. But the moment I paused, took a deep breath, and tried to sincerely be square for someone else's joy, something shifted. My heart felt lighter, softer, more open, and that's when I realized joy is like sunlight. It never diminishes when shared. In fact, it spreads even wider. This is what the Buddha pointed to with Muda, the joy of celebrating others' happiness, a simple wisdom, yet when practiced, it transforms the heart and brings a peace that feels both deep and freeing. So, in this video, let's go a little deeper into this practice. Together, we will explore how celebrating others can actually free out our hearts, protect us from comparison, and open the door to a joy that never runs out. Let's begin.
Have you ever noticed how, just as you're about to fall asleep, your mind finally softens, the noise quiets down, your grip on the day loosens, and suddenly, you're simply resting? Spiritual practice, in many ways, is like that. It's not about forcing awakening, but about gently allowing the conditions for peace to appear, almost like drifting into sleep without effort. You begin to notice it in subtle ways. The sharp edges of your reactivity start to soften. Compassion, once fragile, begins to deepen like roots finding fertile soil. The restless need to prove yourself fades into the background. You're no longer chasing awakening as if it were a prize to win. Instead, you're aligning your life with the conditions that naturally support it. Practice shifts. It's less about pushing, more about nurturing. You tend to the soil, not just the fruit. And then you pause to ask yourself, what am I feeding with my attention? What habits am I strengthening with my choices? Slowly, you realize this is how your inner world transforms, not through harsh discipline, but through wise and tender care. Even suffering itself changes shape. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You begin to wonder, what is this teaching me? Discomfort no longer feels like punishment. It becomes information. It reveals where you're clinging, where you're resisting, where you're entangled, and as you see it clearly, the knot begins to loosen. It's not about analyzing every detail of your life. It's about gently tracing the outline of your experience so you can meet it with clarity. And in that clarity, something liberating unfolds. There's always a choice. Not between good or bad, but between living with awareness or slipping back into unconscious repetition. The more you trust this unfolding, the less you need things to look a certain way. You stop running after peak moments. You begin to value the quiet beauty of ordinary days. Meaning starts to live in the process itself, in how you relate to what is here right now, rather than in some imagined destination. This kind of trust is radical in a world that constantly demands proof, results, and perfection. It gives you permission to rest without retreating, to grow without rejecting yourself, to live from presence instead of performance. And when setbacks come, and they always do, you respond differently. Instead of collapsing into despair or blaming yourself, you pause, you breathe, you ask, what conditions led to this moment? What small shift might open the next one? And suddenly, every moment becomes a doorway, not an escape route, but a return. In this space, even the smallest gestures carry profound weight. A moment of truly listening. A single breath before reacting. A quiet, compassionate thought. These aren't dramatic changes, but they run deep, reshaping the pattern of your life one layer at a time. You begin to see how intention colors everything. Choices rooted in fear leave behind a residue. Choices born of clarity bring ease and lightness. Mistakes still happen, of course they do, but they no longer feel like failures. They become part of the path. Not detours but teachers. And as you look deeper, you see the illusion of separation dissolve. Every word, every silence, every choice echoes outward. Your healing touches others. Your steady presence calms more than just your own heart. This doesn't mean you're responsible for everything, it means you're connected to everything. And in that connection, you find dignity, humility, and grace. Grace, it's what carries you forward even when results aren't immediate. It's what lets you notice the quiet shifts, the ripples that are invisible yet real. You stop needing to measure every step. You begin to trust the unseen. Patience becomes natural, not because you've given up, but because you trust the larger pattern. This trust allows you to hold uncertainty without hardening, to face difficulty without closing your heart, to give care without needing applause, to live with purpose without being driven by ego. And when life rearranges itself, collapsing, opening, reshaping, you no longer panic. You meet it with steadiness. And you ask, almost like whispering to life itself, what wants to emerge now? You begin to ask yourself gently, what is ready to be released? And in the same breath, what is calling for care, for nourishment? You realize you're not carrying any of this alone. Every moment, every experience, is woven into something larger. Nothing stands apart. Everything arises together, interdependent, connected. This is the essence of dependent origination. It isn't about control, and it isn't about fate. It's about the natural unfolding of life. Not guided by certainty, but by awareness. Not held in place by rigid rules, but carried through relationship. And it becomes sacred, not because of some far-off destination, but because of the willingness to walk, to listen, and to trust that the path will reveal itself. Step by step. This isn't just spiritual talk. It's an entirely new way of living. A way of loosening the grip, of no longer clinging so tightly to everything. A way that allows you to breathe more freely, to move with ease, to become fully yourself, gently, naturally, without forcing, always with trust. And when that habit of grasping starts to loosen, when your body finally begins to trust that it can rest in the unfolding of life, something deeper surfaces, not louder, but heavier. It's been there all along, sitting quietly beneath years of movement and reflection. Shame, not the kind of shame that comes with public mistakes or sharp embarrassment, but the quieter kind, the kind that seeps silently into the way you see yourself. The kind that shapes your tone of voice without you noticing. That makes you shrink back in certain moments without knowing why. It lingers in the pauses between your thoughts. It colors the way you treat yourself. And this is the moment to face it. Not with judgment, not with harshness, but with the wisdom that has been slowly growing in you since the very beginning of this path. Shame doesn't need more analysis. It doesn't need more punishment. What it needs is light. It needs to be met with understanding, with the same gentleness you've been learning to cultivate, in silence, in breath, in compassion. The Buddhist teachings offer a clear framework here. They were never about perfection, never about fixing yourself, but about freeing the heart from the misunderstandings that keep it small. Shame thrives in isolation. It whispers to you that you're the only one who fails, the only one who is flawed, the only one unworthy of belonging. But the Dharma begins from another truth, the truth of shared suffering. The first noble truth tells us, pain is part of life. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you are alive. And that shifts everything. Shame is no longer your identity, it's simply part of the human condition. You're not broken, you're human, and that recognition itself is the doorway to healing. Because often, inner criticism disguises itself as motivation. Many of us were taught to believe that being hard on ourselves is the way we grow. But in reality, this belief cuts deep wounds. It divides the mind, creating an inner attacker and an inner victim. The Buddha called this division one of the root causes of suffering. Not because anger is bad, but because it misunderstands how the mind truly works. Growth doesn't happen through fighting yourself. Freedom arises from understanding yourself. This is where the teachings on the 5 hindrances come alive. They give us a direct way to see the patterns that block our clarity and keep us from resting in freedom. They're not sins, they're not personal defects, they're simply mental states, clouds passing through awareness. And each one, when understood, points to a deeper need beneath it. They're not enemies, they're signals, gentle reminders. And the first hindrance is sensual desire. It shows up when the mind reaches outward, trying to soothe something unprocessed. It may look like chasing after pleasure or numbing discomfort, but at its core, it's a yearning, a deep desire to feel whole again. Shame often feeds this cycle. It whispers to you that stillness is unsafe, that if you dare to pause, you might collapse. It tells you that the only way to survive is to keep running, to keep escaping yourself. But the practice here is not to suppress the desire, not to push it away with force. The real practice is to meet the deeper need that's hidden behind it. You can ask yourself, softly, what part of me is longing to be comforted right now? When you bring presence to the ache itself, instead of chasing what you think will fix it, you begin to untangle it from craving. From there, we meet the second hindrance, ill will. This shows up as anger, resentment, irritation, and often, it takes the shape of hostility turned inward. When shame takes root, it often grows into a quiet rage at yourself for simply being the way you are. You hear it in those inner questions. Why am I still like this? Why can't I ever get it right? The practice here isn't to fight back or give in. It's to soften, to turn toward the harshness. Not with more harshness, but with curiosity. And when you name it gently, this is ill will, you create just enough space. And in that space, kindness has a chance to appear. Slowly, you begin to see that the anger you've carried for so long was often inherited. It wasn't originally your voice. It's an echo of someone else's pain. Then comes the third hindrance, sloth and torpor. This is the heavy fog that settles over the mind when shame feels too much to bear. You may feel numb, unmotivated, distant, like you're moving through thick clouds. But this isn't laziness. It's the body's natural freeze response. When the nervous system feels unsafe, it slows everything down, hoping to protect you. The practice here is not to push yourself harshly, but to gently awaken energy. Not with force, but with small, loving actions. A short walk, a mindful breath, even a tender question, what's possible right now? Just in this moment? Sometimes, it's simply one step, and one step is enough. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. The mind spins in endless loops, trying to escape the heaviness it carries. Thoughts jump from one fear to another, never finding rest, and shame fuels this by telling you that you have to fix everything before you're allowed to feel peace. But the practice here is stillness, not by shutting the mind down, but by returning, over and over again, to the breath. Each time, with compassion. You don't need every answer to be okay. You only need to come back, gently, again and again. And then, the fifth hindrance, doubt. This one can feel the most corrosive when shame is present. It whispers, "This path won't work. You're too broken. You'll never really change. But this isn't wisdom. It's fear disguised as truth. The practice here is not to argue with doubt, not to wrestle with it. It's to keep practicing anyway. To build confidence, not through blind belief, but through lived experience. You remember your intention. You return to your breath. You take the next kind step, however small, and slowly, trust begins to grow. These 5 hindrances are not permanent barriers to healing shame. They are more like maps. Each one reveals the conditions where shame tends to thrive. And when you meet each with understanding, their grip loosens. That's where right effort comes in. It is the guiding light when working with the hindrances. But this effort isn't about straining or pushing yourself to exhaustion. It's about balance. It knows when to lean in and when to rest. It's applying just enough energy, not so much that it creates tension, and not so little that you drift into inertia. Right effort unfolds in 4 steps, preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning those that have already arisen, cultivating wholesome states not yet present, and maintaining the wholesome states that are already alive within you. In the context of shame, the first step is to prevent the mind from falling back into its old, familiar traps. That means learning your patterns, noticing what triggers them. If you know that certain habits, conversations, or even media leave you drowning in self-judgment, you begin to limit your exposure, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, out of care for your own heart. And then comes the second step, abandoning the unwholesome states that have already taken root. When that inner critic rises up, the practice is to meet it with clarity. You don't just believe it right away. You pause. You look at it carefully. You question it instead of bowing to it. You might ask yourself, is this really true? Is this actually helpful? And if love had a voice right now, what would it say? With time, these questions begin to weaken the old pattern. The third step of right effort is the cultivation of wholesome states, qualities like compassion, patience, and self-forgiveness. These are not passing moods. They are more like muscles. And just like any muscle, they grow stronger through daily choices. You strengthen them when you choose to speak to yourself with gentleness, when you create rituals of care, when you stay present even though avoidance would feel easier in the moment. The fourth step is sustaining those wholesome states once they're alive in you. And this is where trust deepens. You begin to realize that kindness isn't just a fleeting feeling. It's a way of living, a path you can walk. And you walk it even when it's not easy, even when shame whispers that you don't deserve care or compassion. You keep returning to your intention. You stay with your breath. You hold steady. Buddhist practice doesn't promise that shame will vanish overnight. What it does promise is that with awareness, you no longer have to be ruled by it. Shame begins to lose its power the moment it is seen clearly, without fear. When it's met with wisdom, it becomes part of your story, but no longer the whole story. And when shame no longer directs your every step, something deeper emerges. Not the kind of confidence that's a performance for the world, but a sense of dignity. You begin to feel your own worth, not because you are flawless, but because you are here, awake, present. You make peace with imperfection. You stop needing to prove. You start simply being. This kind of shift transforms the way you walk through the world. You begin to set boundaries without guilt. You express your needs without apology. You allow yourself to rest, without needing to justify it. You no longer chase after belonging, trying to earn it. Instead, you embody it. The mind quiets down, not because it has no thoughts, but because it has stopped attacking itself. The body relaxes, not because all pain is gone, but because it no longer braces against the weight of self-hate. Your choices begin to align naturally, not to impress anyone else, but as a way to honor your own wholeness. This is not a final state you arrive at. It is a practice, a way of moving through each day with both integrity and softness. Shame may still visit, of course, it will, but now it no longer defines the whole room. It becomes a signal to listen to, not a life sentence. And as you keep meeting it with wisdom, the space inside you grows wider. You begin to trust that you are more than your worst mistakes. That your worth is not fragile. That your essence is never up for debate. This is what it means to move from shame to wholeness. Not by erasing the past, but by bringing it into the light. Not by silencing the inner critic, but by giving the voice of inner truth a stronger presence. Not by pretending you are flawless, but by remembering you are, and have always been, worthy of love. And when shame no longer dictates your steps, when the voice inside begins to sound more like a trusted friend than a cruel enemy, something opens, a kind of spaciousness appears. You are no longer exhausted from defending yourself or endlessly trying to prove your worth. You can finally rest in simply being who you are. There is space now, a space wide enough for new questions to rise, not from fear, not from anxiety, but from sincerity. You may find yourself asking, what is my life really for? What am I here to live, to offer, to create? And the answer doesn't come as a performance. It's not for validation or applause. It comes from a quiet place within, a place that longs to serve something deeper than ego. This is the turning point. It's where your attention begins to shift, no longer focused only on repairing yourself, but on living in alignment. It's a movement away from mere survival and toward meaning. And not the kind of meaning that inflates identity, but the kind that arrives softly, like a whisper in the heart. This is the Dharma. Dharma is not a job description. It's not the title written on a business card, or a list of goals neatly arranged on a vision board. Dharma is the expression of truth through your life. It is how your unique presence meets the world when you are fully aligned with what is real. It isn't one fixed path for everyone. It's not about achieving some outer success. It's about becoming clear enough, still enough, to hear what life itself is asking of you, not what the ego is demanding to take. The ego seeks recognition, but Dharma seeks sincerity. The ego clings to significance, but Dharma listens for truth. The ego builds identity, while Dharma gently dissolves it. This doesn't mean rejecting identity altogether. It means softening its grip. When you hold identity lightly, it stops being a prison and becomes a vehicle. You begin to see that purpose doesn't emerge out of pressure. It doesn't reveal itself through endless striving. In fact, it unfolds only as striving begins to fall away. Dharma doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear the whisper, the noise inside has to grow quiet, not through force, but through gentle attention. Stillness becomes essential, not as some dramatic silence, but as the background that allows subtle signals to be heard. And clarity, true clarity, doesn't arrive all at once. It grows slowly, through presence. Often, you only notice it afterward. You remember the moments that lit you up, the simple tasks that felt whole and satisfying, even if no one else noticed. The experiences that carried you into a flow where time seemed to disappear. These are the signs of alignment, not just signs of talent, but of a life meeting awareness with ease. Listening to Dharma means releasing comparison, because no one else can walk your path. No one else can tell you what is truly yours to carry. Advice can point you toward orientation, but your deepest direction always comes from stillness within. And that direction rarely appears as a complete map. It usually comes one step at a time, through a choice. A single conversation, a quiet moment of courage to say yes when fear says no. Ego craves certainty. Dharma invites trust, and trust begins to grow when you choose to act from what feels real. even if you don't yet know where it will lead. You start to value inner congruence more than external approval. You choose authenticity over applause. And paradoxically, this allows you to connect more deeply with others, not through roles, not through masks, but through presence. But there is a subtle danger here, one that many teachers have pointed out. Chogyam Trungpa called it spiritual materialism, the way ego uses even spiritual growth to reinforce itself. You meditate so others see you as enlightened. You serve so you can feel superior. You collect teachings like badges instead of applying them as medicine. When this happens, the language of Dharma may remain, but its essence is lost. Real Dharma work means stripping away the performance. It's about coming back to what is true before it becomes impressive. It's about humility, not ambition. You don't need to be famous. You need to be sincere. Dharma doesn't crave the spotlight. It thrives in honest action. No matter how small, this work requires deep listening, not just during formal practice, but throughout life. In the way your body feels after a conversation, in the energy that carries your decisions, in the texture of your attention as you work. These are all places where alignment quietly reveals itself. When you walk along the path of your Dharma, even the difficult moments carry a sense of meaning. They may still be hard, but somehow they feel purposeful. Yet when you're off your path, even moments of success can feel strangely hollow, as if something essential is missing. The truth is, the path is not fixed. Dharma is alive. It evolves as your insight deepens. What once felt aligned may, over time, no longer fit, but that isn't failure. That's refinement. You learn to release, not because you are giving up, but because life itself is gently pointing you in another direction. Attachment to form, even to spiritual form, can block the deeper unfolding. This is where right livelihood, one step of the Eightfold Path, becomes so important. On the surface, it means choosing work that does not harm others. And that is true, but looked at more deeply, it means choosing a way of living that reflects your values. A life that expresses integrity. Not perfectly, because struggle is part of it, but with honesty and care. When your daily actions reflect your inner truth, suffering eases, even if your circumstances remain challenging. Alignment makes them lighter to carry. And this alignment shifts your sense of what success really means. Success stops being measured by how much you produce or how much recognition you gain. Instead, it becomes about the quality of presence behind what you do. You may speak fewer words, but those words carry weight. You may serve in quiet, unseen ways, but the impact runs deep. You stop needing endless proof. You start trusting your lived experience. This doesn't mean doubt disappears. Doubt is part of growth. It sharpens discernment, but doubt is no longer turned into a weapon against yourself. Instead, you learn to meet it as a signal, to pause, to listen more closely, and in that listening, trust slowly returns, not through striving, but through stillness. Purpose, you see, is not something you find. It is revealed, and often, what reveals it is your willingness to stay with discomfort, to remain awake in those in-between spaces where clarity has not yet arrived. Dharma unfolds not only in moments of clarity, but also in the confusion, the waiting, and the surrender. You begin to realize Dharma is not always grand or dramatic. It may not lead to recognition or legacy. Sometimes, your path is simply to offer presence in quiet places, to tend to what others overlook, to do small things with immense care. And this is not lesser work, it is the very heart of service. Even failure becomes part of the path. When you act from alignment and things fall apart, it doesn't mean you are wrong. It means life is removing what no longer fits. Jobs may end, relationships may shift, roles may dissolve, but what remains is more honest, more real. and you begin to see just how much energy you once spent holding together things that were never truly yours. This shedding, of course, brings grief. Letting go always does. But along with grief comes freedom. You no longer carry what drains you. You no longer pretend to be someone you're not. What rises up in its place may look quieter from the outside, less impressive to the world, but it feels rooted, steady, and true from within. And when you meet others from this place, your presence itself becomes healing. Not because you have all the answers, but because you are living from alignment. You don't offer advice to fix. You offer your being. You witness. You listen. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It's something that is felt. And as you live from Dharma, even your spiritual practice begins to change. It is no longer about achieving special states or chasing mystical experiences. It becomes about deepening into truth. You practice not to become someone else, but to become more fully yourself. The self that is not just ego, but expression, not a static thing, but a movement, alive, unfolding, and evolving. And with that, a new kind of peace begins to take root. Not peace as the absence of all struggle, but peace as the presence of clarity. You still feel pain, but you no longer feel lost inside it. Even on this path, hardship still comes your way. The difference is, you are no longer lost in it. You feel connected to something larger than the story you tell about yourself. Something deeper than all the plans you carefully arrange. Something sacred that moves quietly beneath it all. And this isn't something you can chase down or control. It's something you lean in to hear. You listen, and when you truly hear it, you respond. That response, simple, sincere, is your path. That response is your offering. That response is your Dharma. In time, you find that the question, "What is my purpose?" begins to fade. Instead of searching for an answer, you begin living the question itself, as a practice. Each new day is no longer about proving yourself, but about serving something greater. You wake up and quietly wonder, how can truth move through me today? That small whisper becomes your compass. That whisper becomes the way forward. And the peace that follows is not born from control, but from surrender, from allowing what has always been inside you to surface. Patiently, steadily, completely. Purpose is no longer tied to applause or recognition. Meaning begins to arise from simple, honest acts. And as this happens, something within the heart softens. The constant striving that once filled your days loses its grip. You are no longer chasing importance. You are no longer desperate to be seen in order to feel real. But even within this quiet strength, a subtle ache can still linger. A longing for someone to notice you. A wish, unspoken, that your goodness, your efforts, might one day be celebrated. And when that recognition doesn't arrive, a dimming can set in, not out of resentment, but from a kind of fatigue. It is here that another form of joy waits to be discovered. A joy not dependent on personal achievement. A joy that comes alive in the success of others. A joy that heals the tender wound of invisibility. This is the gift of mudita, sympathetic joy, one of the 4 immeasurables in Buddhist teaching. It is the ability to rejoice in the happiness of others. Not because it gives you something in return, but because it reveals the natural goodness life already holds. Mudita is the antidote to envy, to comparison, to the myth of scarcity. It is also the quiet medicine for that hidden grief of being overlooked. In a world where value is so often measured by visibility, to practice joy in others' well-being without needing it for yourself is radical. This doesn't mean pretending to be happy when you are hurting. It means shifting the very source of joy, from being tied to your self-image, to being rooted in the shared field of goodness that belongs to all. When someone else receives what you yourself have longed for, the reflex may be to contract. to measure your worth against theirs. But mudita invites you to expand instead. This expansion does not happen automatically. It takes practice, it takes presence, and it takes honesty to acknowledge the subtle sting that can arise when someone else succeeds. That sting is not a failure. It's human. It's the echo of a culture that taught us to compete, to compare, to whisper endlessly, "What about me?" Mudita doesn't ask you to deny that ache. It asks you to hold it gently, while also making space for a joy that is not about possession, but about possibility. You begin small. You notice moments of joy that require no effort, no ownership. A child laughing freely, a friend finding peace after a long struggle, a stranger receiving help when they needed it most. These victories are not yours, but neither do they belong to anyone. They belong to the shared field of life itself. When you allow yourself to be touched by these moments, without turning them into stories about your own lack, something subtle begins to shift. The heart, once clenched by scarcity, begins to loosen its grip. The old need to compare starts to soften. You begin to see with new eyes. Joy is not a limited resource. It does not shrink when it is shared. In fact, the opposite is true. The more you celebrate joy in others, the more sensitive you become to joy itself. Not the fleeting pleasure that comes and goes, but the deeper current of aliveness that runs through all beings, including you. There is a special power in this practice when it's applied during the quiet moments of invisibility. You know those times when your efforts pass unnoticed, when someone else is praised for what you too have worked hard on, when recognition is withheld though your heart longed for it. In those moments, instead of letting resentment grow, you pause, you take a breath, and you remind yourself, their joy does not cancel mine. Their light does not cast me into shadow. And my worth is not defined by whether others see me or not. Sometimes, you might even whisper silently inside, may their happiness continue. May their success bring more goodness into the world. This isn't about pushing your feelings away. It's about expanding the field of your awareness. You remind your own heart that it is vast enough to hold both longing and celebration at the same time. That your dignity doesn't depend on applause. And when you do this, something beautiful happens. Joy becomes a mirror. You start to realize that the qualities you admire in others often reflect the seeds already alive in you. When you feel moved by someone's kindness, it's because you sense that same potential within yourself. When another person shines and your heart lights up in response, it is not envy, it's a quiet reminder that this light is also part of you. Even if the world hasn't seen it yet. Sympathetic joy, mudita, dissolves the illusion of separateness. We live in a culture that teaches us to privatize joy, to claim it, to defend it, to measure it like a scarce resource. But mudita sees through that illusion. It understands that joy is relational. It is not about possession, but about participation. It's less about having and more about sensing. Less about ownership and more about openness. Think about when someone you love succeeds. Your happiness doesn't really come from the fact that they won. It comes from their smile, their ease, their laughter. You feel it in resonance. And that resonance isn't limited to close relationships. You can experience it with people you barely know, even strangers who will never know your name. Their joy still moves you, because joy belongs not to the mind's ledger, but to the heart's capacity. And this practice deepens when you extend it toward those you usually envy. Not in a forced way, not as performance, but gently, honestly. You begin by naming the sting of comparison. You allow yourself to feel it without shame. And when the heart is ready, you offer the smallest wish. May they be truly happy. May their happiness be steady and lasting. At first, these words may feel far away, almost hollow, but with time, they soften the sharp edges within. Slowly, the heart becomes less guarded, less armored. It opens again to the beauty that exists beyond personal gain. And here is another gift of Mood Eater: it protects you from burnout. When your joy depends only on your own achievements, life becomes narrow and exhausting. But when you are nourished by the joy all around you, your well is constantly replenished. You no longer wait anxiously for your turn. Instead, you discover that you're already part of the great turning of joy itself. This shift changes the way you move through life. You find yourself celebrating more easily, giving praise more freely, lifting others up without worrying about who gets the credit. Not because you're trying to be noble, but because it feels natural. The heart finds its pleasure in connection, not control. And let's be clear, Mood Eater is not passivity. It is not complacency. It does not mean you stop dreaming or striving. It simply means you stop resenting others for having what you don't. You keep walking your path, but with a lighter step, carrying a heart that isn't burdened by comparison. And when you live this way, you make space for mutual joy. You become someone others feel safe to celebrate with. You're no longer the friend who disappears when things go well for them. You become a steady witness to their rising. And in that presence, your very being becomes a blessing, not a competitor. And maybe that is the quiet beauty of Dharma. It doesn't always ask us to shine the brightest, but to shine together, to celebrate the light in others. And in doing so, keep our own hearts open. If today's reflection touched something in you, I invite you to stay connected. You can subscribe to Daily Dharma Wisdom so these gentle reminders keep finding their way to you. If this message brought you peace, consider leaving a like, or sharing it with someone who might need these words right now. Together, we can keep this circle of wisdom and compassion growing. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for walking this path with me. Until next time, may your heart stay light, and may joy always find you.